our regular economic financial commentator, and outstanding, obviously, businessman of his own merit, and that is Craig Stobo, and he joins us now. Happy New Year to you, Craig.
Happy New Year, Michael. I'm not sure that saying it twice after January the 1st is good luck. You recall I went and visited the Oracle of Cromwell in the new year and wished you Happy New Year then. And you very kindly gave me a couple of bottles of wine. So, yes,
I gave you 3, again, so what happened to the other one? Did it not make it out?
May have been drunk early.
That was a very good afternoon. I had an enormous amount of, and I really enjoyed meeting your partner too. We had a great time. Listen, mate, you're heading off into lockup. Why are you heading off to lockup for a State of the Nation speech for the Prime Minister?
I got invited by one of the corporates that obviously booked a table. It's hosted by the Auckland Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to understand what Luxon's views are in the coming 12 months. I think plan is a bit strong for the coalition. I don't think they're not command control economy type planners. It'll be a case of what levers are they going to use to help the economy grow, which, as you know from last year's data forecast from the Treasury, it's a 0.5% growth year in forecast, which is, as I said last year, bumping along at the bottom. So we want to see some opportunities come out of this. But I thought he may well take heart from what's happened in the US in the last few days. And I just want to spend a bit of time on what Trump's done,
sure,
and what that means as a tailwind. So Luxon will have the benefit, and the coalition as a group will have the benefit of what Trump's doing, and what's basically the great unwind. So 200 executive orders issued. He keeps reiterating America first and the golden age. Came through in his inauguration speech. But I went through some of the executive orders that haven't been covered by the press here, but ones that are important to us. He's leaving the Paris Climate Accord, so he's out. He's leaving the world, or the US is leaving the World Health Organization. He's rescinding all the diversity policies put in place by Biden. He's rescinding or removing directions under the previous administration to enable remote working, so federal employees will have to come back to their offices. He's leaving the global taxation deal. He's actually expanding the death penalty, which surprised me. I didn't know about that one. We've talked about tariffs before. He's looking to change the Canadian and Mexican trade agreement as we speak. And of course, he's created what's the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which is going to be headed up by Elon Musk. Now, those are all hints, I think, for the administrations here as to what the doors that are opening and the tailwinds that are developing around potential change. Tariffs are obviously really important for us. Rosemary Banks, as our ambassador to Washington, will have a big job negotiating potentially us not getting tariffs. But as business people, we can do something about that in advance. For those who are listening who are exporting to the US, we can try and bring forward shipments to the US earlier, so they don't get imposed by tariffs later on. We can look at putting in place contracts that have an equivalent of a force majeure. We call it a Trump majeure, so that if things happen, you have an out, which is quite important. You can try and diversify your supply lines, and you can think about currency. So you'll be aware the New Zealand dollar's dropped quite a lot since September last year to around 57 cents today. So I've got effectively a depreciation benefit for exporters that are going to the US, so that's helpful. So you look at the speech today by Luxon, you say, well, with the context of last year's half-year economic fiscal update, the ministerial reshuffle, which is quite important, Brown going to health to use his political acumen to change things there. But probably more importantly for this discussion and for the midday economic growth speech is Nicola Willis's appointment to basically economic growth minister, not economic development, but economic growth. So when you look at the half-year economic fiscal update last year, the Treasury downgraded their labour productivity forecasts, and that led to lower growth track, which we just talked about, higher unemployment, higher costs, expenditure costs, and less taxation, which means the surplus is pushed out to much later in the decade. We've got much higher debt levels at 46% of GDP, and interest costs are going up. So we can't sit here and do nothing. And I was disappointed at the end of last year that there was no response policy-wise to that setting by Treasury. And I guess this speech today is going to address basically how do we get ourselves out of this faster than sitting there looking in the headlights. So what are they going to be looking at? Well, I think there'll be discussion around competition. How do we increase competition? These are all productivity issues. How do we get more competition into the private sector? How do we increase foreign investment where there are projects here that are worth financing from offshore? Tourism's back on the agenda. How do we increase tourists to New Zealand? Increasing international students. And of course, the underlying kind of foundation of all of our productivity is the state of our education system. There's one advantage that we don't focus on enough here that the US definitely has, and the US economy is incredibly strong. The Federal Reserve may be poised to stay on hold for a while, given how strong it is, and that's an advantage for Trump, and that's driven by productivity and especially technology. Technology is one of the four factors of productivity: land, natural resources, capital, and technology. So how do we get better as New Zealanders at using technology to get more output for the same amount of resources, or the same output with less resources using technology? How do we adopt technology faster? Not necessarily driven by government expenditure, but by driven by deregulation, innovation opportunities, bringing in the skills that can do that tech change quickly. So it won't be a point-by-point detailed change in policy that I'm expecting today, but I am interested in direction and how businesses can respond to those changes. So it's quite important because they've only got, 18 months to 2 years left in the current term. And the economy's flatlining, and they are the party or the coalition that's been pushing the cost of living and economic growth as what is in their DNA. So they do need to start delivering after that dreadful end to last year.
You have been around long enough, Craig, to know that there are cyclical downturns often associated with the international trading market, commodity downturns, prices, etc. I see the dairy sector is starting to make some sort of recovery on that basis. Is it possible to over-egg this in the sense of we are just going through one of those trading cycles and possibly we will be automatically go in a position of stronger economic growth this time in 12 months?
Well, there's a couple of things there. I would change the adjective you used around the dairy sector. I would say it's going to be a record year for dairy, both prices and volumes. I mean, Southland had a pretty tough time weather-wise, but the rest of the country had pretty good grass growth. So, $10.50 for a dairy payout, that's amazing, times the volume. So that's a really strong part of our economy, no question, subject to obviously China, etc., how it all plays out. But there's two elements going on. Yes, there's the cyclical issues driven by the way that our businesses have had to weather much higher interest rates from that sharp rise in interest rates a couple of years ago. But the underlying all of that is this productivity question. Yeah. And you can't have an increase in civil servants from 47,000 to 65,000 with no change in output. You can't have two of our sectors, as identified by the Productivity Commission, now the Treasury, health and education, detracting from GDP growth because they actually have less output for the inputs that they put in. So there has to be change. So I think there's the cyclical response, yes, but I think there's a much deeper question around how do we allocate our scarce resources amongst the public sector? How do we encourage businesses to take more risk and to generate returns, generate employment, and increase productivity? So there's two levels here, not just cyclical, but underlying structural change. And I think that's what I want to hear from the Prime Minister today.